Zoom in on your face. Okay. Thanks for letting us keep this. Sorry.
Of course.
You know, it's a little awkward to be on camera. Okay, so you have had a chance to read through the feedback. Sure. Do you have any questions about it before we kind of jump in?
No.
No? You're good? Okay, so we're gonna kind of like skip over a bunch of it and really just dive into a few areas. In terms of the lesson, I want to highlight, which I always do. I feel like every time in a debrief I highlight your connections, but I like to highlight them because I think they're awesome. I thought that you were so dishonest but believable when you noticed how excited you were to learn. I've always wanted to learn about rainforest herbivores. I was like, that's not true. But I kind of believe him right now. And the kids were like, totally hear you, Mr. Ryan. Always wanted to learn about them also. How many of you want to learn about rainforest herbivores? I'm like, yes, I do. So that was awesome. And I think you do a really nice job of that in all of your subject areas. And I do know that when visitors came, and I don't remember where they came from, BES maybe? We had a BES visit. Whoever it was, they came in here and they came out of your room talking. They were so excited about your classroom. They were so excited about it. They were so excited about how engaged the kids were, how enthusiastic you seem about teaching, and just like how into everything you're teaching you seem, and how that rubbed off on the kids. And I just think that it's an area that you do such a beautiful job with. And I know it kind of started last year in social studies and in your area of like, you just really love social studies, which God bless you, because we need somebody to lead the charge on that subject. But I do think that it's something that you've done this year, a really nice job pulling into your other subject areas, and it just creates this environment of like, what we're learning is so important without you having to say like, this is really important. The other thing I wanted to say about the lesson is that last year, I remember this unit very well, and it was not nearly as strong as where they were during this lesson. Their recall of what you were talking about was so much clearer. Their use of the vocabulary was so much clearer. Your use of the vocabulary was so much clearer. And it wasn't quite as dry. And I'm sure you either have the memory or you blacked it out. But last year it was like pulling teeth to try and get them to like get into it, and it just was not at all the tone of the lesson. So I want to commend you on that, because nonfiction read-alouds are not an easy thing to pull off at all. It is tough. Starting in 3rd grade, they have the advantage to get into research, so it is really exciting, because it's like, we're going to look at this really fast, and then you're going to get into books and research, and you don't have that advantage, and I think that you really played it up for the crowd, which is wonderful, and you'll find that enthusiasm to be something that you're going to have to carry over into tutoring in a whole different way, to try and get them from 4:30 to 6 to be jazzed. So I'm going to skip over the 100% stuff. The class looks really good. I had that one notice saying, do you want to talk through that interaction with Bryant? You kind of get what I'm getting at there. Okay. In terms of questioning, what I really want to talk about today is how you can increase the rigor of the questions that you're asking the scholars, so that you're getting higher quality responses. But then also, that's our ideal world, right? You ask a higher level question, you get a great answer. But also, like, what are you going to do when ultimately you're asking these more rigorous questions? You're probably going to start off by getting fewer correct answers. And so going through that loop of like, we're going to push on the questioning, but then we also want to kind of provide the path for like, okay, if I'm going to ramp up, I have to know that some of them are going to fall off the back of the truck initially. And what am I going to do to make sure I can kind of like grab them and put them back on as we continue to go? Your questioning in terms of hypothetical questioning, that was one thing I wanted to point out from this section, is awesome, because I know we talked a lot about it in math, where we were saying like, well, what would happen if I did blank? What would happen if I did this? So I was really excited when you asked the question about insets, and when you said, you were talking about insets, and you said we never skip over an inset, because they do. They skip insets and photographs and captions, and you made that point really clearly, and I was like, oh, okay, yeah, good point. And then you asked the question to Darren of, well, what would happen if we skipped over an inset? And I thought that was such a great hypothetical question of, I've highlighted a common error, and I'm going to explain it, but I want you to, let's really think about what goes wrong when you skip an inset. So that's an example of that higher level questioning that we're going to dig into, that we want to see more of in the lesson, is that type of questioning on hypothetical things, and really about how to talk to them about specific things so that their answers are higher level. Darren is an example of a scholar, I don't know why I'm smiling. Darren is an example of a scholar who's going to give you that answer you're not looking for, as he did. So we'll talk about how to handle that kind of answer, because he's a perfect subject for who you need to expect to kind of give you a little bit of a messed up response. Other strengths in questioning really related to remembering questioning. This unit, it's absolutely critical that you keep your language consistent, and you did a great job with that. Visual feature, organizational feature, there's like a lot of specific terms, and you were really well prepared. You stuck really closely to the lesson plan. You glanced at it a few times, but not in any way that was like overly looking at the plan, but you were really, really on message. So I think that that's part of the reason that you're seeing them being able to respond to and explain things a little bit more clearly. Even Summer gave a beautiful answer about table of contents, and when we were on the carpet, and knew exactly what it was, knew what its job was, explained it succinctly, explained it correctly, and that's just, with Summer, that's a massive improvement. And then why questioning, use a lot of how and why questioning. So all of those are areas that are going really well. And what we want to think about now is that now that you're asking more of those questions, the hows, the whys, the what would happen if, is really figuring out how to be more specific in that questioning so that scholars have an answer to give you. So often what we ask, and this is both on a curricular level and an instructional level, and it's a progression, right? So our questioning years ago was just process and procedure. Where do you look? What does it mean? What is this called? What does it mean? That was it. Like, that was it. That we drilled it into them as drill, drill, drill. And then we moved away from that, and we went through this period, which is what we're coming out of right now, where we were very into why is this important? Why does this matter? What would happen if? How does it connect to real life? And that questioning phase that we're in right now it's good. It's better than the one before, but it produces a lot of shallow responses. Do you see that?
They're just like either like fabricated ideas in their mind, which have no basis.
Yeah.
They don't come from like their own experiences,
right,
or what would actually happen.
Right. They're either like not. Right, they're either fabricated, they're made up, they don't come from their experience, or another thing that I find is that they're vague, and that they often will just rely on like a definition or on a stock phrase, and a real common stock phrase is like, because then we wouldn't know.
Right.
It's like, well, yes, obviously then you wouldn't know, but that's not the point. Or because then we wouldn't understand, or because the book wouldn't make sense, or in math, because we wouldn't know how to answer the problem. So we're seeing a lot of that like shallow answers, and that's coming from our questions, because we're asking them very generic, broad questions, but we're looking for, and I think if you look at our ASRs, we're looking for a very specific type of answer. So what we want to talk about is how to fine-tune those questions so that we're asking them about specific things. And the best way to do that when we're talking about questioning around the importance of features within nonfiction text. This is super specific to this lesson, so we'll talk about that, and then we'll blow it out to how it would look in your other subjects. But when you're talking about the importance of, for example, a visual feature, you want to connect it to a very specific other thing. Because otherwise they're going to tell you if you took it out, it wouldn't make sense, and that's not the correct answer. It would make sense. I could have read that book and not have the inset or the photograph of the rhinoceros. Is it a rhinoceros? Yeah. The rhinoceros, the Sumatran rhinoceros, or the caption. And I would make sense, and I would understand the main idea of the text. That's not why they're in there. But if you were to say, well, what is the importance of this visual feature to you as a reader in adding to what you learned from the text? Because then what you're looking for is, what new information do I get from this visual feature that connects to the text? And it will cut off immediately, well, because then it wouldn't make sense. Yeah. Does that make sense? Yes. So just thinking through setting it in relation to something else. Why is blank important to blank? And because then when they're doing that, what you're doing is you're kind of creating a path for them so that they're able to see, oh, why is an inset added to the information that's shared in the normal part of the text?
So in math, this would look like, I'm thinking, why is it important for us to look for the correct side, like centimeters or inches? That would be a question that I would ask, and they would say, because then you would get the wrong answer. To make that more specific, I would say, why is it important for us to choose the correct side when measuring? And then they say, because then I would get the wrong measurement.
Right, you could do it that way, or to take it even more specific, you could say, how does knowing which side of the ruler to use affect the correctness of my measurements.
Okay, all right.
Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
So like, yeah, what you were saying is getting more specific, but going through and saying, what's the concept? How does knowing which side I'm using affect the correctness of my measurement? Well, if you measure in centimeters and you're supposed to measure in inches, it's not going to be the right number. And then the goal is, tell me more about that. Well, if you centimeters, you're going to have more centimeters than you're going to have inches. Well, why is that going to happen? Because centimeters are smaller than inches, right? So you're able to then follow a train of thought as opposed to just getting the stock, like, because then your answer would be wrong. And then that's the end of the conversation. And they are correct, but we're not really getting them to see why. So what you do is when you get that specific questions, you're able to blaze kind of a trail of questioning that gets, one, you can get more of the scholars involved in it, and then two, you're getting much deeper into the concept. So if we take the example of, I think the one that I wrote is the inset. So what does this text feature, which is an inset, how does it contribute to the ideas in this part of the text? Because the inset, I don't remember, what was the inset about, do you remember?
No, I don't remember.
So let's make up that it was about a different rainforest animal, which is distinctly possible. So they were talking about Sumatran rhinoceroses and this, and let's say that the inset was about a different type of rhinoceros on another continent. Like that's the type of change that they would make. That is saying, how does this contribute to the ideas or the content that we've learned in the part of the text? What we're looking for them to say is, well, this describes another rhinoceros from a different place in the world. So the text is telling us about a Sumatran rhinoceros, and the inset is telling us about an African rhinoceros. That's true. Why would the author tell us about a rhinoceros? Rhinoceri? Whatever the plural is. Do you know?
I think.
Why would the author tell us about more than one rhinoceros, more than one type of rhinoceros in different parts of the world? Or you could go that route. So like, why is the author doing this? Or you could go up the route of, what does the author teach us about what's similar and different about those two rhinoceros? And you can go in that path of questioning. Additionally, questions like, when you're looking at text features, I think really making sure that you're 100% clear on what text features do. And obviously, I mean that entirely not offensively, you obviously know how to read them. I just more mean, when you think about what is the function of a photograph, what would you say the function of a photograph in the text would be? As a second grader.
As a second grader, to give me a visual image of what the words on the
Pretty
page.
smart second grader. So I can visualize in my mind. Yeah, exactly. And that's what, a photograph is going to show me something that was already described in the words of the text, and it's going to give me perspective, more information about them, more whatever, highlight their importance. That's what it's going to do. And an inset is different. Insets are often, they'll take what is a grain of information from the text and they'll blow it out. So they'll be talking, for example, about, the United States Department of Agriculture says, and quote, and then all of a sudden there's an inset that's like the mission statement of the United States Department of Agriculture. That's a passage from a 7th grade interim assessment. And so it takes a small piece of information and it blows it out. Or it gives information that's related but not talked about in the text. So knowing yourself, like what is the actual function, what is the actual purpose of these features that I want them to understand, will help inform your questioning. Because when I talk about insets, when you talk to them about insets, what you really want to think about too is, this is interesting. So this is about an African rhinoceros, and the whole text is talking to me about Sumatra. So why would the author package this as an inset and not as a photograph? And that's another way to stretch that critical thinking around why the author's doing what feature, because what they ultimately want them to say is, well, because it's not really related to the topic. It teaches us about something that connects to the topic, but it's not telling you more about the topic. So it's an inset and not a photograph. Because as a reader, if I saw a photograph of an African rhinoceros, I'd be like, what is that? And actually, worse, because they're in 2nd grade, they would think that Africa and Sumatra are somehow connected. Same thing, Africa, Sumatra, it's all the same, and Africa's a country. So it would reinforce a misconception. Is that clear? Do you understand what I'm saying? So really focusing on the first type, I think that's something we can commit to immediately, is when you're asking questions of importance, connecting it directly to something else. How is this important to this? That's kind of level 1, and let's just start with that. And I think that that's something you can do. That seems reasonable, right? Just doing it right away. The second level is using what you know about the function of text features, specifically in the nonfiction unit, to drive kind of the conversation and those questions. Okay, but that's like a second one. How long do you think it'll take you to get to that second level piece?
It depends on, I think it'll vary based on the text.
Yeah.
I think that first one, they'll be able to do well on because they're pretty good with like making connections.
Yeah.
I think that second part, I would think that some of the higher kids might be able to hit it pretty soon, especially if we practice it like a couple days in a row.
Okay.
I think the lower kids can get it with the higher kids, like being used as leverage for them.
And what do you think about in terms of you like, when do you feel like you're going to want to start driving questioning based on that type of level of analysis of like text features? Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
On your end.
I would say probably like by the end of next week.
Great. Okay.
Beginning of the following.
So taking, say, like the next week to really focus on the importance
yeah.
connected to the other, and then from there building up.
Building
Okay.
up, yeah.
So let's plan for that to happen. I think that that will be great. I do think you're right. I think that the first one they'll be more successful with. You're still going to get some stumbles, and that's what I want to talk through now. So you're still going to get some of the answers that they're in a habit right now of answering with that generic or vague because it's important, because I wouldn't understand, because. And I think that what you really need to be kind of prepare yourself for is getting those answers and then working out of them. And the only way that you're going to get a scholar out of that habit, a Darren out of the habit, a Daniel out of the habit, is going to be to stick with them and drive them through the process through pinpoint questioning. Because if you jump off of them and move on to someone else, what you're going to end up getting is everyone else is going to continue to get better at it, and they're going to continue to give you that really stock, generic answer. So that's where pinpoint questioning comes in, and really making sure, particularly with both of them, because I don't think they're very confident in their answers. Is that accurate? Okay. So they don't seem very confident in their answers. They're not really comfortable with sharing, and when they answer it, they do sound like, because then you wouldn't understand the text, and telling them, true, but let's get more specific. So kind of acknowledge that they're going in the right direction is like the first line of defense. Like, true, but let's get more specific. Let's dig into that. When you say that you won't understand something, what information does this text feature, photograph, whatever, does this text feature tell us? Well, it tells us about the Sumatran rhinoceros and that it's traipsing through the rainforest. Good. What new information does the photograph give you compared to what it told us in the words? The photograph lets me see how big it is because it's enormous. It's the size of a tree. I have no idea. I know they eat a lot of food, but it looks humongous. Exactly. That's what you wouldn't understand if the author didn't include the photograph. So really working them through the process, but I think the first step, because it is something that the scholars in your class who tend to give you the generic answers are less confident. Danielle will sometimes do it. That you're going to have to start by like kind of opening them up by coaching into and kind of acknowledging like, true, but let's be more specific. Let's talk that through. And then going through the very specific questions to get them there. Because you need to both build up their confidence and build up their thinking so that when they get asked that question the next time, hopefully they're jumping in a little further down the sequence. You know, they're not going to go from answering
generically to the most specific, but hopefully somewhere.
Hopefully we do like a little bit of a jump in between, and then we'll get there faster. So then instead of asking 3 follow-up questions, you're asking 2 follow-up questions, and eventually only asking 1 follow-up question, and then ideally it gets to a place where they're just answering the question correctly. That's something that I would really encourage you, if you feel like it's something that you can kind of manage at the same time, to put with that first one of like over the next week, really working on that. Why is this important in relation to this? And then drilling down when the kids are not getting the correct response. Does that seem reasonable?
Absolutely.
Okay. And then the last piece is just around, this kind of goes into something that is out of both subjects, and it's that point around CFU that you read in relation to photographs and images, and really trying to figure out how can we get them to be more observant of photographs and images, and how can we get them to really actually unpack what's in them and why they're important. Because I think right now the kids Well, actually, they did. In the lesson, they said, you asked, like, well, how can we learn from this photograph? And their first response was read the caption, which is great that they know photographs have to go with captions, but they jumped right to the caption, which means they're not digesting the image. And I think we've seen it in social studies a little bit with the, like, you've been trying to include a lot more images for case studies and that type of stuff in the social studies lessons, and I know you did in the last lesson also, where it was like, oh, look, here's a picture of an urban area, here's a picture of, what did you say? You showed them New York, right?
Yeah, I'm going to put it.
What was the lesson you had that Taylor Swift song?
Oh, that
you
was.
showed them a picture
yeah,
of
that was
something.
when we were talking about like
immigration.
No, we were talking about why people like want to come to New York. Why it's
Okay.
an entertainment
Right.
hub essentially.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also the concept of why, when there's tall buildings, there's more people,
Yeah,
that population
yep.
density. So they don't do well with it. I don't.
They give you like generic answers.
It's the same thing. So we're seeing evidence of the same problem. And I think what we need to do is we need to use text-dependent questioning as a start. So starting with, what do you see? What do you see in this image, and what does it make you think?
Because usually we just jump to like, what is this image
Right.
telling me?
Yeah. What can you infer from this image? And they're like, I wouldn't understand. There's a lot of buildings? It's like, yeah. So you're asking a high-level question, they're giving you a low-level answer. So you can tweak the question to get them to give you a better response, which is what we just talked about. But here what we want to do when we're talking about images is we just want to meet them where they are and just start there and build up. So there's two different ways. So you change your question to elevate their answer, and in this case we're going to change our questions to match what they need to start with. So here you want to focus on probing in with, what do you see in the image and what does it make you think? And really go back to that sentence frame that you've done a nice job with in terms of evidence from the text of, I see tall buildings, and that makes me think a lot of people live in this area because there's so many floors, and I know that there's a lot of apartments on every floor. I see a lot of lights, and that makes me think that it's a really bright, really humming area. And getting them to play through that, and then asking them the question types that we were talking about in the questioning conversation. Because I think that the same thing can be applied to the rhinoceros image of, instead of, well, what do I need to do? Look at the caption saying, let's look at the photograph. What do you see and what does it tell you? I see a rhinoceros that's almost the same size as a tree. That tells me he's humongous. I see that he's traipsing through and he's crushing branches underneath. It looks like he's standing on top of plants and he's kind of like crushed them, and that makes me think that he's really big. And they're going to come to similar, that makes me thinks. And all the things that it makes them think is going to be the point of the photograph. That's interesting. All of you noticed so much evidence that made you think that this rhinoceros is huge. What does that tell you about why an author, this author, included this picture to add to these works? Because they need to start at that base level of analysis first. And it can happen in science, it can happen in social studies, it can happen across the board. So we've got the questioning in terms of importance, and then the kind of opening up and coaching into scholars who struggle with that as like the next week. We have the fall, like starting the week after that, the concept of really drilling into using the purpose of different functions to drive the conversation. And then what do you think about where this fits in?
I think that they can start this.
Do you feel like this one they can manage
Yeah,
at the same
yeah.
time as wise?
Yeah, because I mean, if you ask them about anything, they have a lot to say about like
Okay.
images and stuff like that.
Okay, great. Perfect. So that's it. I see that you're good to hear. Thank you very much, and thank you again for letting us both come in and for taping this. I really appreciate it. Have a great day, and I'll see you at the tutoring PD. Get excited. Your enthusiasm this morning for tutoring was not what I was hoping.
No, I
Get yourself excited.
You don't know what grade I'll be